too.
I think teachers need to engage with other teachers like you who have a sense of humor through these times, who can, take a step back and go, okay, this is the situation, and how are we still going to do the best we can for our students in these times? So I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your wisdom with other teachers.
I don't know if it's wisdom, but I appreciate your kind words, Charity. I'll just, if that's all right, I'll just take over the screen at this point,
Yeah,
I think.
go for it. Share screen. Should be green right below you. Perfect.
Okay. So before we get started, this is the same thing I do as with my association and with my students. I start by asking if anybody has any questions. Before you know anything else about me, is there any burning questions anyone needs answers to of any kind? I know that's kind of a flop idea, but sometimes kids come into the room with the most burning and yet trivial question that they just have to get out, and grown-ups do too. So anybody, anything? I'm not seeing anything.
I'm not either.
So I'm going to just get started. I'm going to give you a little bit about myself. I am really genuinely passionate about teaching science and helping kids learn. I've been doing this for 29 years. My first 4 years were in New Jersey, where I taught grades 6 and 4, and then the last 25 years, including this one, in Pennsylvania, where I taught 5th grade, and I've been currently teaching 6th grade for 10 years. I've also, in addition to that, taught summer space camps that I created. My very first teaching job was teaching adults to read and write, and that was pretty cool. I've taught National Guard members to pass the GED exam, and one of the high points in my career was being able to be a teaching coach at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. So that was pretty amazing. Some of what I believe, I think science is very much a hands-on experience, and therefore I deliberately designed in our curriculum that every chapter lesson that we use from the textbook would have a student lab, whether the lab that was in the book was worthwhile or I needed to design one of my own. So the kids are constantly experiencing science with hands-on learning when we're in the brick and mortar building. Online, it's been a little bit harder, a little more challenging, but there are plenty of YouTube videos out there that show pretty much all the same science labs that I was doing in the class. With distance learning, I would strongly advise caution in recommending that children do labs on their own at home. In Pennsylvania, at least in our area, there's an issue of socioeconomics where it may not be advisable for kids to be using up materials that their family might need during this difficult time. And second, there's a safety factor. I can't control what the kids are doing when they're in their own homes. So that's why I did all YouTube videos through Edpuzzle. Philosophy is humor. I teach 6th graders. They're 11 and 12 years old. They still are kids. I do expect a lot of them, but I also try to balance that with humor. I'm renowned for my terrible science jokes. And I invite kids to offer up their own. And as anyone who's dealt with kids knows, their jokes are sometimes very hard to get. So I love them, but whatever. I am very organized, and I also am iterative. That is, I prefer things to go with plenty of review as we move forward. So I have been using interactive science notebooks for probably about 8 years now. And in those interactive science notebooks, we also do a lot of review of past skills. I have very high expectations of my students. And one of the things I've noticed in 29 years, administrators have an audience of parents, and I consider that I have an audience of students. So I leave it to the administrators to cater to the parents, and I strive to hold the kids accountable. Sometimes that creates a friction, especially in this online environment. It definitely has, because we've had children who have simply not wanted to work, and their parents have not been very attentive to that. But we do the best we can with the situation we have. I prefer to teach current science, so I always supplement the textbook with recent discoveries. There's a lot of good material out there, which I'll get to in just a moment, that can give you modern science ideas, new discoveries. I would caution in general with science, things don't become entrenched in the textbooks until there's been plenty of supporting evidence for whatever it is. So if you say to kids, hey, I just found this great paper on something, that paper may not hold up in the long term. The idea being that you need numerous scientific research studies and papers to start to firm up your evidence before it can move to the level of a theory. And that's one of the things that people, especially adults and parents, don't understand about science, is that it is constantly reinforcing to a point where it has extremely high validity and reliability, but that doesn't happen overnight. So I do prefer current science supplementing what they get from their textbooks. I really like blending technology and old world craftsmanship. I don't know if anybody knows Dina Zeik and her foldables materials. I have been using those off and on for many years. Kids just in the past 2 or 3 years in our school have been using Chromebooks on an almost daily basis. I like online programs, but I also expect kids to be able to read a wooden ruler. The hands-on skills, I think, are eroding. I've had kids who do not know in 6th grade which way to hold a pair of scissors, and I feel like that's practically a life skill. So I combine old world craftsmanship of doing things with your hands and a respect for the online technology. In virtual learning, I would highly recommend these sites. There's many, many more you could use, but in this virtual learning environment, I've depended on Google Arts and Culture, which is sort of an umbrella gathering of all sorts of venues that you can send kids to. And I know it says arts and culture, and what does that have to do with science? But almost every museum that has any kind of online presence is connected through Google Arts and Culture. So science museums, art museums, history museums, all sorts. In this environment, I've depended on Edpuzzle, Quizlet. I send videos through Safe YouTube. We also use vocabulary, and of course, absolutely, we've used Inq-ITS. Fortunately, Inq-ITS was something that I'd been doing with the kids before we went into the online environment, so they were familiar with how it worked. That was not true with Edpuzzle and vocabulary, so there was a learning curve there that was not great, but we got there. Other sites that I would highly recommend: NASA, of course, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and its European counterpart, the European Space Agency. PHET out of the University of Colorado has excellent simulations for science experiments. My students have been using Quizlet for several years as a study site. And I would recommend Safe YouTube. It may be old hat for some of you, but I just learned about it in this virtual environment. Any YouTube video can be filtered through Safe YouTube so that it strips away ads, links, anything that's inappropriate for kids. So it just gives you back a URL that does that, and then you can post that to your Google Classroom assignment page. And I'm assuming most of us have been using some tool like Google Classroom for organizing their virtual learning. So why use virtual labs? Well, first of all, the power of Inq-ITS, and boy, in this virtual learning environment, this has been really, really important. It can reinforce and review in-school student labs. The timing of this crisis was interesting because in school, in brick and mortar school, we were working our way through the flower tutorial. And it was pretty straightforward. There were no big bumps in the road, but not everybody got it done. And with Inq-ITS, its schedule is flexible enough that I didn't feel pressured to have the kids have everything done by a specific date. So that lab, the flower tutorial, went from brick and mortar into the virtual environment. So the kids knew how to do all the steps, so we could continue with it there. And then they also had 2 more labs to get done during the virtual education time. But had that not been the case, it would have been my plan to continue with the Inq-ITS to reinforce the hands-on labs we were doing in school. That is a really, really good use of that tool. If there's kids who are absent for band, chorus, being pulled out for gifted, guidance counselor, you name it, they're just absent. If they've gone on their Orlando Odyssey or something. It provides equivalent lab experience for those students. You can't spend the time setting up a lab for one student. You just can't. It's not realistic, even though some administrators may wish you could. So this could give you an alternative to that, and the kids can do it on their own time. You're not using up valuable school time. For the learning support and students who are struggling with English, it really provides good reinforcement because Inq-ITS is endlessly patient, and Rex is great because Rex never gets upset when Rex has to tell the student for the 4th or 5th or 6th time to go back and check that hypothesis again. So it is really good reinforcement for learning support students and ESL students. If they struggle through a lab and they get to the end and they just feel like they haven't succeeded, you don't want any kid to feel like they haven't succeeded. You can reassign the lab to them and you can give them more scaffolding and support the second time through. And then between you and your special ed teacher, you can determine, do you average the 2 scores? Do you just take the better of the scores? What do you do? So I think it's a very, very good tool, especially for those kids that struggle. We don't want to keep putting impediments to the science learning, but these kids come to us with struggles with language, with comprehension, even just with processing speed. And Inq-ITS allows for them to do what they can at their pace. It also, on the other end of the scale, allows accelerated investigations for gifted students or highly motivated, inquisitive students. I had kids who were saying, after they did ramps and phase change, they were like, well, can I do another lab? Because that was fun. That was a lot more fun than Edpuzzle. I was like, sure. I can try to find something for you. Inq-ITS has a lot of good labs. They're not all 6th grade appropriate, but you know, for the kid that really wants to keep pushing the envelope, that is a great tool. It also, and this is one of the best time savers, it allows you to flip the model. Let's think how long it takes for a lab to take in school. You might need half a period to prepare the kids, then the next day you have the whole period for the lab, and then maybe you have to help them with the lab report at the end. You can flip significant amounts of that and put it back on them to get it done, and then they come back to class to discuss, to explore, to have a good scientific discussion, to review, and if necessary, problem solve because something didn't go right. One of the best experiences with Inq-ITS is that kids realize that scientists don't get it right the first time. They don't get it right the first time. And the ideal answer is not always evident. It just doesn't happen that way. And I love making kids excited about science, but more important is respecting the work that goes into science, and Inq-ITS allows that to happen as well. So why use Inq-ITS as opposed to, actually, Charity, I don't know other virtual lab interactive programs. I don't even know what's out there. Because that's why I got so excited about Inq-ITS. I think you're in a class by yourself. It's highly structured. Rex, as I said, is supremely patient. It's incredibly efficient. It saves, I can't imagine how much time this is saving me because the virtual lab is ready to go at any time that the kid wants to access it. It just uses electrons. It doesn't use up any of my lab supplies. And especially with the uncertainty about budget coming up next year, I'm going to be depending on that because all of our budgets have been cut. It's disciplined. By that, I mean that it adheres to standards and expectations. And if the kid's not getting that, then they just have to keep working until they can rise to that level. It can be reassigned so that if they get through the lab and they haven't done successfully on perhaps their communicate their lab results portion, which a lot of kids struggle with, then they can be reassigned and try again. It does give immediate student and teacher feedback, and one of the really cool tools that was obviously much more useful in the brick and mortar building was the immediate feedback that I could get while all the students were working on their Chromebooks. I could get that information on my screen as to which kid was just hung up on a step. And even with Rex trying to intervene, the kid still hung up on a step. So I just get up and I quietly go over to him and I ask what the difficulty is. And often it was just a matter of them not reading it correctly, and then they could move on. And in a actual lab setting, you try to move among all the kids as fast as you can and get to all those issues. but there's just nothing that can compare to Inq-ITS being able to monitor every kid every second. It offered fast diagnosing and interventions. And this was the blessing. I just need to explain real quickly. This past year, I was blessed to have 3 science classes and 3 social studies classes. The years before that, for 9 years, I had 8 science classes a day. So lab days, I was wiped out. And at the end of a lab, at the end of that day, I was exhausted. And, you're thinking about grading all these lab reports and stuff. Inq-ITS was a blessing because it automatically grades using its whole intuitive, and I can't even explain all the work that went into how they graded that stuff. But looking at their grades and then looking at what the kid wrote, I was like, this is amazing. It's spot on. Charity would have to explain better how they figured all that out with their algorithms and stuff. But the automated grading is a blessing to any overworked teacher. And that's all I have to say. I hope I haven't droned on too long.
I had a question, Malcolm. Would you mind talking about European Space Association?
The European Space Agency.
How are you using it?
Here, let me see if I can. Let's see. How do I? Hang on. I'm trying to get through this. Okay. European Space Agency.
Oh, you even have a tab up.
I do, but now, okay, there it goes. Yeah, but I can't see the little tabs.
It's right there, right?
There it is, okay.
Yeah.
Anytime that, well, first of all, I need to go back and say I'm a child of the Apollo era, and the Apollo 11 essentially landed on the moon for my birthday in 1969. I'm a July baby. So I've always had a passion for space, and I have looked for 29 years of ways to connect space to whatever we're doing. So that's the main thing I do with both NASA and the European Space Agency. European Space Agency has tremendous resources. They've got all sorts of things that you can do as an educator to make kids understand that America doesn't have a monopoly on space. Like, this is their education page, but look, they've got videos, they've got images that you can, and all of this stuff is available to you for your use as a teacher, without any issues with copyright or anything. They've got all sorts of activities and things that you can use, and they give the kids a wider worldview than, let me see, hang on. There it is. This is NASA. I'm imagining most science teachers are familiar with everything NASA has to offer, but NASA is not the only provider of space exploration, vehicles, data, all of that. So I wanted kids to have a wider worldview than just NASA. So I used the European Space Agency to show them problem solving, for example, like with Rosetta Stone. And I mean, there's just so many things that the European Space Agency has offered. I would say just spend a little bit of time wandering around the site, because they do a lot of valuable work, and they do a lot of great problem solving, the same that NASA does.
Yeah.
Just different scale, perhaps. And frankly, until this Saturday, we're hoping that we have our liftoff. European Space Agency has been responsible for a lot more space activity than NASA has in recent years. So,
yeah, this is, I apologize if I just took everybody else down a path they already knew about, but I've just never used it. I've never used it with my own students. I know that, like, teaching climate change, I really like the Canadian sites and the Australian sites.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the Australian site. You want to?
Yeah. We don't need to, but just so you know, I really, for climate change, the Australian site, just, Climate Change Australia, and you can pretty easily find it. And they have a really good carbon footprint calculator. And I like starting the year off that way by having students calculate their carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. And if you're using the Australian site, then it's forcing them to do it in metrics. And so they're having to start the year off by going, oh, okay, let's convert this from inches,
Right.
And so, because I I feel like as a science teacher, like the metric system is near and dear to my heart. And so I want the students to get acclimated to that. And
Yeah,
so
that's neat. Okay.
using a resource outside of the United States helps with that and getting them acclimated to thinking about measurement in a real system of measurement. Yeah, my 7-year-old, like I heard them playing and they're like, this is a meter long. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, can I just stop being a parent now? Like he just said a meter long, like I fulfilled my
That's
destiny
great.
right there.
Great.
Yeah. So did anybody have any questions? Anybody? I can see I see nothing at all in the chat beyond Jen telling us she's from Michigan, which we're hoping that she has some decent weather. And then there's nothing in the Q&A. But Malcolm is very, very helpful, as you've seen so far. And so if you have any questions, somebody said, hold on. Jamie said, hold on. So she's going to have a question. Maybe she's thinking about it, or maybe she's typing it out and it's going to be kind of long. That's okay. What is the Australian site that I'm talking about? I'm going to have to find it, Jen. It'll take me a minute, but I'll find it and I can share it. Okay, Jamie teaches physical science in 9th grade. What do you do in 6th grade to prepare them for 9th grade?
For 9th grade? Wow. Well, that's a great question, because this past year we've gone through a science curriculum renewal process, and we're now looking at piloting next year to align K through 8, which will better prepare our 9th graders. But in 6th grade currently, and for the past 10 years, it's been all physical science. And then 7th grade has been life science, and then 8th grade has been earth and space science, which has been a little awkward because I've had to sneak my space stuff in the 6th grade by way of physical science. So to prepare them for 9th grade, in 6th grade, we're basically setting them up to have a more rigorous view. Like as Charity was saying, it's in metric. I can't tell you how many kids have asked me how long a meter stick is because they're expecting me to tell them in inches, and I refuse to do it because I won't do it, because inches are over here and out of date, and we don't use them in science, and meters are over here, and they're contemporary science. So mainly what we do in 6th grade is do physical science to prepare them for 9th grade, but in our district, 9th grade, they can take kind of a split view. They could go down environment and ecology path, or they could go into physical science that's a little more rigorous than 8th grade. There's also beginnings of biology in 9th grade. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, we've got...
There's another question.
Nope.
Is that it?
Jamie, do you still have students? Are you done for the year? Oh, Jamie asked what your favorite science is to teach. What's your favorite?
I spent about 9 years doing summer space camps through a local community college, where I got to design my own curriculum for kids as young as 3rd grade up to 8th graders. And absolutely doing space camps was my favorite thing to teach. I've traveled to, I think, all of the NASA centers, and I've done work with NASA through the years, and I've helped pilot some things with NASA. So my passion for space is in everything I do. So I would say if there's a way to sneak space into something, space exploration, that's what I do. So that's my favorite.
That's awesome.
You found, oh, okay. You found a climate change site.
And then if you just, honestly, climate change in Australia, there's a lot. There's quite a bit in there. It's kind of exciting. To me, that's my area that I really enjoy getting kids excited about, is what can we do to reduce pollution and climate change. Mike always asks the same question. Mike always asks the same question. How do you provide feedback to students on their Inq-ITS work?
Well, first of all, because the Inq-ITS is automatically scorable, that is to say this program can score the work itself, I can have individual conferences with kids and say, you know, in this one lab, like RAMPS, for example, produces 12 grades. I can show the kids what they actually did at the end of what they're doing. I can also intervene. Kids in 6th grade don't tend to read. They just go, if there's something at the top of a screen and a button at the bottom of the screen, they go to the bottom of the screen and hit click because they figure there's no consequence for that. So Rex will pop up all the time and say, you got to back up and do this over. So I'm giving them feedback because Rex is giving them feedback, and you're just saying, okay, go back and actually read what you're supposed to be doing here. And when I give them feedback on the finished results, their weakest area is in their communication, the claim, evidence, and reasoning. They really, really struggle with that. So we really, really dig in and work on that, where we try to make them see that it's a sequence, and that middle block, that evidence, is completely dependent on what they did in their little virtual labs. They want to editorialize that portion of it. And fortunately, Inq-ITS is powerful enough, and I don't really know how the artificial intelligence does this, but it recognizes when the kids have strayed into editorial comments and not presented, you know, evidence from their labs. I would say a goal is to get maybe 4 Inq-ITS labs done a year, because it's such a deep and rich program that you can spend time building quality in their results. So you don't have to make them feel compelled to rush through any of these steps. So that feedback was important, right, with the flower tutorial. I mean, we were on that, golly, I want to say for 2 months, going little step by little step, first in school and then out of school, and making them, you know, stop and think about what they're doing. I hope that answered the question. Oh, we got another one.
Oh, that was me.
Oh, that's you. Okay.
That was me.
Oh, you're looking for.
I'm getting
you're trying to recruit. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Oh, so Jamie has never used Inq-ITS.
But she works with Sarah and Joey.
Right. I would highly recommend it. I can't say enough about it. Charity, can I tell them where I first found you at not you, but I found the company at National Harbor?
Yeah, NSTA.
Yeah, NSTA convention at National Harbor, and I was there with a colleague of mine, and this was the year that we were teaching 8 science classes a day, and it was just exhausting. And then I saw this presentation, and my mind was literally blown. And I said out loud something really inappropriate in a gathering. I said, "Holy!" And everybody in the room started laughing, because this program has the power to carefully move kids through scientific concepts with rigor and discipline and very high standards, but with infinite patience, and then grade it all for you. And my mind was just like, wow. So
I wish I had been there. I wish I had been there. I was just hanging out in Oregon in my office.
Oh, well.
You know,
you and I have gotten to know each other. It's fine.
Yeah, in the good old days when I had childcare, kids in school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a mind-blowing experience, to the point where when we were done with that day, I actually called my principal and said, "We have to pilot this. We have to try to get this. This is so cool." And then it happened, and I couldn't be happier. And I'm really hoping, now we're transitioning to a new pilot program next year for another thing, but we're only doing 2/3 of the pilot. That is to say, if this is the curriculum, we're only doing this much. And I'm like, Inq-ITS will be the other third.
Like, we've got this. Okay, so Jamie says, what labs do you love to do that are hands-on?
Oh, hands-on. Good.
What are your favorite hands-on labs?
I have the kids build model rockets during the year.
That's what I was going to say is mine. That's weird.
That's okay. We can both have that as a lab.
Yeah.
Now, in a normal circumstance, then in the spring, we would go out to launch the model rockets, and no kid was able to launch until they could do all 3 Newton's laws for me. I got to tell you, I have high expectations. They would literally have to come up and recite the 3 laws before they could launch. Now, over the years, I've varied that in different ways, where they just have to tell me, how does the rocket on the launch pad show Newton's first law or something? So model rockets, I would strongly encourage kids as young as, I have done it with 5th graders with incredibly tight structure and supervision, but kids as young as 6th graders can build SD's model rockets with no trouble and launch them. In this virtual environment, they were out of luck with that. But I would say model rockets is one of my favorite things to do because it encompasses so much physical science. You got all of Newton, you got gravity, you got chemical changes, you got physical changes, you got chemical reactions, just oodles of science in there. Oodles.
You know, I was able to get a dad who, a couple of different times I was able to get a dad who was more like engineering that came in and built like a platform. And so I actually ended up having 3 platforms for students to like hook up their rockets and fire from.
You had 3 launch pads at the same time?
I did. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's super impressive.
Yeah. It was amazing. I love using parents. Like, you know, when you can use those parents, it's so wonderful. Like they love it too. Oh, Jen said a write-up of that. Model. Can you share that?
Write-up.
Do you have your lesson?
I have lesson plans, but I've been doing model rockets for decades, so it's not really where I mean, my lesson plans wouldn't mean much. I do know that the National Association of Rocketry, the NAR, has online resources for educators. And interestingly enough, the Civil Air Patrol does too. I used to be a member of the Civil Air Patrol Education Wing, and they have tremendous resources for both fixed wing and fixed wing and rocket education. As far as a write-up, golly, I'd have to do some scavenging. And if people don't mind, if you give me a couple days, I could send something to charity to kind of rebundle and package and send out to folks. Estes, the company that sells these model rockets, does have a limited educator program online. The main thing is you have to be comfortable, and a charity, agree or disagree, you have to be comfortable yourself with building and launching a model rocket.
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, don't turn the experiment, don't let you be the experiment in the classroom. Learn how to do it first. So This past year, we have over 300 6th graders, and we have 5 science teachers, and I was the only one who was comfortable with teaching the kids to build them. So in cycles, I spent a week per class with these different homerooms, with 14 different homerooms, teaching them to build their rockets. And for most kids, it took 3 40-minute periods to build the rockets, with 2 days extra for, any mishaps.
I would say, so Jen, I'm going to look for mine too. I loved mine, my model rocket activity. And then roller coasters. That's my other one. And
you mean with marbles? Do you mean
with either way? So I started off, I was teaching high school physical science, and I started off doing it with Hot Wheels back in the days when we actually had like longer periods of time to teach things. And so I started off having them do Hot Wheels cars. And then as our time kept getting crunched down, I switched to marbles, and marble roller coasters. So no kid could complete it until they had, what did I say? They had to have a ramp. They had to have a loop. Like it had to be able to go through a loop. It had to do an S curve and a bump.
I did that. And I'm assuming you used pipe foam insulation. Is that what you did? That's what we did. What was your track?
Garbage.
What?
Yeah, whatever. Like if you could bring in like toilet paper rolls or paper towel rolls or paper or cardboard.
Wow.
Or,
okay.
Like Dude, I told you, like in Oregon, like we
We
have
have no money. I get
we
it.
have
Yeah.
no money. We have no money in our schools. Like, you know, we could be like spitting distance to Nike and Intel, but they can't fund our schools. So,
Wow.
so we, so yeah, so whatever, garbage, whatever you have. And so, yeah, I get some students who would bring in like cut out styrofoam. And I was like, I don't even want to see what your garage looks like at home. Right. Like I'm having a panic attack just thinking about it. But yeah, whatever they had, and they could just make their roller coasters. And what I love about that is that the kid who figures it out first is almost always the kid who struggled the most when you were doing hands-on like science labs, like chemistry style labs. It's like the kid who was struggling the most with writing that up is almost always the kid who like rocks it when it comes to the engineering. Right? Because the writing and all of that writing just like was killer for them, but their brain is just like, oh, you want me to build this? Okay. Like I can figure this out.
Yeah. And the engineering is trial and error and yeah.
And they have more grit, right? Because things don't always come easily to them. And
grit
so they have
is such
more
a great word. Yeah, that is such a great word. That's really valuable because I try to teach my students to get, have that grit instead of turning always to their parents to bail them out. Push on, persevere, get it done.
Yes. Jamie said that she did catapults this year. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Hand saws, drills, that's fantastic.
I do catapults that are just popsicle sticks, 13 popsicle sticks and 2 rubber bands and a Dixie cup. It works great.
Oh, that's
Ping
awesome.
pong balls launched across the room.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Although I think it's really cool, like to have kids, I mean, because she's teaching 9th graders. So to have 9th graders working with saws, working with wood, working with drills. I mean, it's fantastic. Like getting their hands on, like, we're not doing the best job as far as like the academics on the computer for our 2nd grade son, but he's been helping my husband. They're building a sandbox that they're making, like it's going to have a cover that pulls out to be picnic benches. So they're having to do all like measure all of the cuts and having to figure out how they're going to get it to pull up and to be benches. And so I'm like, well, in the big scheme of things, like that's a pretty darn good understanding of math in your head, right? Like, can I build this stuff?
That's great.
Yeah. All of that hands-on stuff. The kids need more of it. Jamie asked, do you make your students write a lot? How much? It isn't fun to grade 90 papers with a lot of writing. No doubt.
No kidding.
Right there.
Yeah. And here again, Inq-ITS, they can write their hearts as much as they want. They can write to their heart's content on the claim evidence reasoning with Inq-ITS, and the computer grades it all. I do make my kids write a fair bit. One of the things I insist on, and they have to learn, is how to provide what I call an academic response answer, either spoken or in writing, and that is restating the question so that if somebody only saw their answer, they would not have to wonder what the question had been. And kids do not like that, but it clarifies thinking, it sharpens their skills in communicating. So yes, they do have to write a lot. I don't know if people are familiar with interactive science notebooks, but the concept is pretty simple. One page is the student reaction to the opposite page of the spread. The teacher provides one page, the kids have the other page. So they're writing something about everything that's in their notebook. I do not grade every assignment like collect and hover over. I just ask for completeness, whether it's accurate or not in many cases. But for lab reports, I take a little sharper view there, and I try to insist on a little higher quality. A lot of 6th grade is closed passages. They're filling in blanks, because if you make a 6th grader write from the top of the page to the bottom, that's 2 days worth of work for them. So they can get through a lab report if I have provided a closed passage where they're just filling in the pertinent data, and then they have blank lines for their conclusion that has to connect back to the inquiry. Hope that answered the question. These are great questions, Charity.
Yeah, no, I found like for 8th graders, I did a lot of scaffolding. So using Google Classroom, providing them with a lab report that had a lot of scaffolding so that they're fitting stuff in, you know, like rather than like, I want them to be able to put their answers in the right place in the data table, but I don't need them to spend an hour making the right size data table, right? So giving them a copy of their lab and having them fill the information out. Because I want them filling the information, not spending all their time formatting. Seriously, like if they are allowed to figure out which color they want their font to be, you will be there forever. You're laughing because you've been there.
Yes, I have. It took, with the online environment, there's not many choices, but for some reason they love playing with fonts. And I haven't had many issues with the highlighting, but there'll be a 3-sentence paragraph that's in 4 different fonts.
I know. Yeah. You're just like,
why are you spending time like that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Any questions? I want everybody to feel like we don't take your entire Friday, but you know, can anybody really go very, very far these days? Like we're just hanging in our backyard, hoping to get that sandbox done.
We get excited when the Prime truck or the UPS guy drops by. It's like, whoa.
Yeah. Yes.
Anybody else? Any questions?
Perfect. Mike is in Montana. I think things are fairly safe in Montana last I checked. So he could go fishing if he wanted to.
Nice. Sweet.
Go on a hike.
Big skies.
Yeah. Okay. Yesterday was my last Thursday afternoon. I'm actually starting to take Thursday afternoons off so that I can go for hikes and get out on the lake or whatever, because I feel like Saturday and Sundays are pretty busy here. Oh, Mike said minimal fishing, rivers or chocolate milk.
Ooh.
Yeah, melting. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But I feel like in our area anyway, weekdays are a little bit easier to get out because there's not as many people out, whereas the weekends there's a lot of people out enjoying the sights. And I have a child who has a medical issue, so we're being very careful.
Sure.
Yeah.
I live in the Poconos, and every weekend we have New York and New Jersey license plates filling up all the areas around here.
Yeah. So you get it. It's like everybody flocks. I'm hoping next weekend we can head out. We're about an hour and 10 minutes from the ocean, and there were orcas spotted yesterday in that bay that's an hour and 10 minutes from our house. And
that's cool.
That's the first time orcas have been spotted there in I couldn't even tell you, like forever. My grandma, who just passed this last June, she said that when she was a kid growing up at the coast, that they used to see orcas, but she hadn't seen them since she was a little kid. So yeah, maybe I've seen orcas up in Washington, but not close. Jamie,
it's amazing how fast nature is bouncing back. Clearer skies, clearer waters.
Yeah.
Dolphins in Venice. Jamie says,
she's in
Jamie,
North
you're most
Dakota.
welcome. You're most welcome.
Yeah, it is remarkable. Well, Malcolm, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Simone, Jamie, Jen, Mike. Thank you. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I hope you can enjoy a little bit of sunshine, and have a wonderful day, and hope to see you soon. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.